So let's talk about something that's been all over social media lately. The idea that happy marriages don't exist anymore. You've probably seen the posts, the viral videos, the think pieces declaring that marriage is dead, that everyone's miserable, that the institution itself is broken beyond repair. But here's the thing. That narrative, while catchy, isn't quite accurate. Yes, marriage has changed dramatically. Yes, many couples are struggling. But the reality is far more nuanced and honestly more interesting than just nobody's happy anymore. Today, we're going to dig into why marriage feels different now, why so many people are questioning it, and what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because the truth isn't that happy marriages don't exist, it's that our entire relationship with marriage has fundamentally transformed. Let's break it down. First, we need to understand that marriage today is being asked to fulfill needs it was never designed to meet. Historically, marriage was primarily an economic and social arrangement. It was about survival, property, children, and social standing. Love? That was nice if it happened, but it wasn't the point. Fast forward to today, and we expect marriage to be everything. Passionate romance, deep friendship, financial partnership, co-parenting alliance, personal growth catalyst, and emotional support system all rolled into one. We expect our spouse to be our lover, best friend, therapist, business partner, adventure buddy, and the person who makes us feel perpetually fulfilled. Psychologist Eli Finkel calls this the all-or-nothing marriage. When these sky-high expectations are met, marriages can be more satisfying than ever before in history. But here's the catch. Meeting those expectations requires massive amounts of time, energy, and emotional resources that most couples simply don't have. We're asking one person to be our everything in an era where we have less time and energy than ever. We're working longer hours, dealing with economic stress, drowning in information overload, and trying to maintain our individual identities while also being perfect partners. It's an impossible equation. So it's not that happy marriages don't exist, it's that we've made happiness exponentially harder to achieve by raising the bar to unrealistic heights. Here's something crucial. We're not seeing more unhappy marriages now. We're just seeing them more clearly, and that matters. Think about your grandparents' generation. How many unhappy marriages existed back then that nobody talked about? How many people stayed together because divorce was socially unacceptable, financially impossible, or legally difficult? How many people just endured? The past wasn't full of happy marriages. It was full of private marriages. What happened behind closed doors stayed there. There was no social media broadcasting every argument, no online forums where people vented their frustrations, no podcasts dissecting relationship dynamics. Today, we have unprecedented visibility into other people's relationships. We see the Instagram perfect moments, and we see the Reddit confessions, the TikTok rants, the Twitter threads about weaponized incompetence. We're exposed to both the highlight reels and the behind-the-scenes disasters. This creates a distorted perception. We think marriages are worse now because we're finally seeing the truth about how hard they've always been. The visibility paradox means we're comparing our private struggles to both the curated perfection and the dramatic failures we see online, leaving us feeling like our own marriages don't measure up either way. Let's talk about something that's fundamentally changed: women's economic independence. This is huge, and it impacts marriage in complex ways. For most of history, Women needed marriage for economic survival. They often couldn't own property, get credit, or earn enough to support themselves. Marriage wasn't optional, it was necessary. This meant people stayed in marriages that weren't working because there was no alternative. Today, women can support themselves. They can own homes, build careers, choose single parenthood, or simply choose not to marry at all. And this is overwhelmingly positive for human freedom and dignity. But it does change the marriage calculation. Now, people stay in marriages because they want to, not because they have to. This means marriages have to actually be good to survive. The bar for good enough has risen dramatically. People are less willing to tolerate mediocrity, misery, or just going through the motions. So when you hear, "There are no happy marriages anymore," what's actually happening is that unhappy marriages are ending instead of limping along for decades. The unhappy marriages that remain are more visible and more openly discussed. The math hasn't changed. The visibility and tolerance have. Social media has done something insidious to our perception of relationships. It's made us chronic comparers. And comparison is absolutely toxic to contentment. You're having a normal Tuesday with your spouse, the kind of unremarkable day that makes up most of life. You're both tired, dinner is whatever, you're scrolling your phones in comfortable silence. Then you open Instagram and see a couple on a surprise romantic getaway. You check Facebook and someone's celebrating their anniversary with paragraphs about how their spouse is their soulmate. You scroll TikTok and see couples doing elaborate pranks or finishing each other's sentences perfectly. Suddenly, your perfectly fine Tuesday feels inadequate. Your good enough marriage feels mediocre. You start wondering, why isn't my marriage like that? But here's what you're not seeing. The normal Tuesdays those couples have. The arguments about loading the dishwasher. The silent drives after disagreements. The boring stretches. Everyone's highlight reel looks better than your behind-the-scenes reality. Research shows that social media use is correlated with decreased relationship satisfaction. Not because our relationships are actually worse, but because we're constantly measuring them against impossible standards and curated performances. Here's an interesting twist. We're more aware of relationship dysfunction than ever before, and that awareness can actually make us feel like marriages are failing, even when we're just finally addressing problems that always existed. Therapy language has gone mainstream. We talk about emotional labor, attachment styles, trauma responses, love languages, and mental load. We have vocabulary for dynamics that our grandparents just accepted as how things are. This is genuinely positive. It means we can identify and address problems. But it also means we're hyper-aware of every small dysfunction. We pathologize normal relationship friction. We diagnose every conflict as a red flag. We're so alert to potential problems that we sometimes create distress where there would have been just minor, manageable annoyance. Someone who might have once thought, "My spouse is moody in the mornings," now thinks, "My spouse has an anxious attachment style that triggers my avoidant tendencies, and we need to address this pattern or we're doomed." Both observations might be true, but one creates significantly more anxiety. We're not necessarily experiencing more dysfunction. We're just naming it more. And sometimes the naming itself creates the sense that things are worse than they are. Now, let's address something real and serious. We're lonelier than ever, and that puts enormous pressure on marriages. Previous generations had built-in community, extended family nearby, religious communities, neighborhood connections, social clubs. Your spouse wasn't expected to meet all your social and emotional needs because you had a whole network. Today, many people have geographically dispersed families, declining religious participation, less community involvement, and primarily online friendships. We're more isolated than any generation in recorded history. And when you're lonely, you expect your spouse to fill that void. This creates enormous pressure. Your partner becomes responsible for meeting needs that used to be distributed across a whole community. When they inevitably can't do it all, the marriage feels insufficient. But the problem isn't the marriage, it's the absence of the broader community that used to support it. Research consistently shows that couples with strong friend networks, family connections, and community ties have more satisfying marriages. Not because their partner is better, but because their partner isn't drowning under impossible expectations. Here's something important. Let's look at what the research actually says. Are happy marriages really extinct? Number: divorce rates have actually been declining since the 1980s. Couples who marry today are more likely to stay together than couples who married 40 years ago. And surveys consistently show that the majority of married people report being satisfied with their marriages. What has changed is that people are marrying later, being more selective, and more willing to leave genuinely bad situations. The marriages that do form tend to be between people who chose each other more deliberately. The marriages that survive tend to be ones where both people are actively committed. Yes, marriage is less universal than it used to be. Yes, more people are choosing not to marry at all. But among those who do marry, satisfaction levels haven't collapsed. They've just become more polarized. Some marriages are better than ever, others end rather than endure. So why does it feel like there are no happy marriages anymore? Because we're comparing an impossible modern standard to a romanticized past that never existed. Because we're seeing more dysfunction than previous generations, while also experiencing more isolation. Because we expect one person to be our everything while having less time and energy to invest. Because we're measuring our reality against everyone else's performance. But here's the truth. Happy marriages exist. They're just harder to achieve and easier to see the cracks in. They require more intentional work because they're no longer held together by social pressure and economic necessity. They have to be good enough to be worth choosing every day. The question isn't, why aren't there happy marriages anymore? It's, how do we build satisfying marriages in a world that makes them harder than ever? And that's a question worth exploring with compassion, nuance, and realistic expectations. What's your take? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into how we live now.